Hi, everybody.
How you doing?
Thank you. Go ahead, son.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. It's a nice turnout this evening from the press, and we hope from the public as well. And I'm not sure you're not here to talk to me, so I'll turn the podium over to our guest speaker tonight, Jimmy Carter.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be back in Buffalo. I think rather than taking up your time, I'll just answer your questions if you don't mind. If you'd let me know whom you represent, I'd appreciate it. Any questions? Okay.
WBFO Radio.
Yes.
Would you tell us, please, how you evaluate Bill Clinton's first few weeks in office?
Well, I think he got off to a shaky start, but I think now the American people see the solidity and the rationality of what he's proposing, you know, with substantial cuts in spending, which I think basically is unnecessary, and also a courageous increase in revenue, trying to get the budget deficits under control. I think his commitment to a better health care program is one that is supported and admired by almost every American. So I would say that he's got an excellent start.
Has he solicited your advice on any policy issues?
Well, I was with him last week, as a matter of fact, both at the State Department and with Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and with most of his cabinet officers to talk about both international matters and also domestic affairs, primarily concerning the inner cities. Yes.
Thank you.
In fact, I was talking to him on the phone yesterday. He called me. Yes.
Bob McCarthy from the Buffalo News.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, do you see any particular role for yourself in the Clinton administration? Any kind of troubleshooting and roles or special roving ambassador type of thing, or anything?
Not directly. You know, obviously, if President Clinton asked me to do something, I would certainly consider it seriously if I thought I was uniquely qualified and it was a limited time basis. But I would not consider accepting any sort of permanent role. We have too many diverse responsibilities at the Carter Center to do that. But we have still a very strong interest in some of the African countries where we've been involved quite deeply, in Haiti and Nicaragua, in the Middle East and so forth. But I think that in general, it's unlikely that I would be called on to be a so-called roving ambassador. Yes, in the back.
Don Postless on Channel 4 here. When you were president, we hardly had a budget deficit. And
That's right.
Did you see it coming, first of all? And secondly, what do you think got us into this mess, and what do you think is the solution?
Can I take my choice of those questions? Well, I never dreamed that under a Republican administration you would have an almost uncontrollable deficit. The main cause of it was President Reagan's $750 billion tax reduction, primarily for wealthy people. And if you take $150 billion out of the annual revenue, this almost ensures an unprecedented deficit, and that's what President Bush inherited. I think that Bill Clinton has tried to address it courageously, not only with increasing revenues, which I think is important and necessary, but also with a reduction in expenditures. Exactly how they'll come out on these expenditure reductions, I don't yet know. But I would say that I was amazed at the level of deficits and the escalation, skyrocketing federal debt. It was because of President Reagan's giveaway tax reduction for the wealthy people, and I think Clinton's done well to address it.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up, if I may. Is it really the President Reagan's trickle down and the tax cut, or Congress continuing spending $1.80 for every dollar they took in?
Well, I've given you my assessment. I think the main reason for it is the enormous tax reduction that President Reagan rammed through the Congress at first when he was president, which amounted to $150 billion in reduction in income annually for our country. And obviously the Congress is equally culpable in expenditures, but it wasn't the Congress really who initiated that kind of giveaway tax program. Yes?
Mr. President, I'm Buddy Shula from WGRZ Radio. I just have a comment. I want to personally thank you for all you've done for human rights, not only here, but in the world. You've done a great deal for human rights.
Well, thank you. That's the kind of question I like. This year, by the way, in case you haven't known, is a year of human rights, and in June we'll be having a global summit on human rights in Austria. And this is the opportunity that we've always been waiting for to give the United Nations some substantive role not only to correct but also to prevent human rights abuses. And I'll be going there, and this will be a major commitment. It's not very well known yet. Yes?
Brendan McNamara, University at Buffalo Spectrum.
Yes.
One of your finest moments was the Camp David Peace Accords. Could you comment on the human rights line? Any opinion on what's happening now between Israel and the Palestinian people in wake of the 400 deportees who aren't deportees?
Well, I have grieved over the 400 deportees, so-called, who are still living, I guess, on the side of a mountain in the snow and ice, and who have no homeland at all. I don't think this was a legal action on the part of the Israelis. I hope that in spite of that, that the Palestinians will decide to go to the resumption of the peace talks. This is a matter, of great importance, not only to Israeli citizens and to Palestinians and Syrians, Jordanians and Lebanese, but also to the people in this country and around the world. So I deplore the deportation, and in spite of that, hope that the Palestinians will participate in the talks. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you.
Barbara Burns from WGRZ. President Bush was often criticized for his lack of involvement on domestic policy. And given your interest in cleaning up the inner cities of America, are you satisfied with the route that Clinton's taking as far as domestic policy and our inner cities are concerned?
Well, so far, the week before inauguration, Al Gore invited me to come to Washington to explain to him and to the key domestic cabinet officers the Atlanta project and what might be done in other cities around the nation, obviously including Buffalo. And when I went to Washington last week, I also met with President Clinton at his request to have a chance to explain what we are doing there. I don't think there's any doubt that under this administration there will be a much more intense commitment to helping resolve the rapidly deteriorating life of people in the inner cities. Our own request to them was not to give us any more money, not to give us any more people, but just to make sure that the existing federal programs were cooperative with us and with each other. I think that's the best way, is to let the private sector do the major part of the work in the inner city and let the government programs be handled both efficiently and in a cooperative fashion. Just to give you a quick example, the two most important domestic programs to poverty-stricken family are health and human services on the one hand, which everybody knows, and surprisingly agriculture on the other. Agriculture handles all the food stamp programs, all the women and infant children programs and school lunches. And rarely in regional areas like this, or like down around Atlanta, do the agriculture and health and human services directors even know each other, much less cooperate in dealing with the problems of the same family. That's the kind of thing we hope to do. I think that Bill Clinton is very eager to see something done to improve the situation we've faced the last 4 years, yes.
Tim O'Shea, Hamburg's son. Since leaving office, you've kept very involved with all sorts of organizations, writing the Carter Center. For you, what's the most significant thing that you've done?
The most significant thing? Well, I wouldn't claim that anything is very significant. The most highly publicized thing we do is perhaps the easiest for us. We build a house every year, and we only build one house each year, my wife and I. But it's the kind of thing you can photograph so everybody knows that we build houses, and a lot of people think that's all we do. But we have, for instance, at the Carter Center, we're in charge of immunizing all the world's children. We have programs in 26 African countries. We've held elections in 8 or 10 nations to end wars or to prevent wars. And so I think that what we are doing is to show that in the non-public arena of life, non-governmental people like myself, that we can do a great deal to address the major problems of peace and democracy and human rights and the alleviation of suffering. So maybe to summarize my rambling response, haven't had this question before, strangely enough. I think that what we've done is demonstrate what the private sector can do, including, former presidents and others who are well known. Yes, sir.
Craig Cannell of Lockport Union Sun. As a man who really does care about people and a Christian, what bothers you most when you look at this country right now?
I'm going to talk about that tonight. I've been asked to speak tonight on the social problems that afflict our country and the rest of the world. I would say the main thing is a rapid deterioration in the quality of life of our next-door neighbors who are poor. the inner cities in this country are going down the drain in an amazingly rapid fashion. And most of society doesn't even find themselves able to acknowledge that we've got a problem. We look the other way. When we do accept the fact that it is a serious problem, we say, well, it's a hopeless case. We can't do anything about it. So I would say that that's the main thing that concerns me, and it's increasingly a commitment of me and my wife and other associates to try to prove that somewhere in God's world we can turn around this decline in the quality of life of these poor people. And we're going to prove that in Atlanta, and hopefully make this an American project so many other cities can learn from our successes and mistakes. Yes, sir?
Abdul Lukman from the Buffalo Criterion. Mr. President, do you think that Clinton's ambiguous answers to the questions of what he's doing up there is helping him or hindering?
I don't think his answers are ambiguous. Obviously, when you go through a campaign as a former governor, not having ever lived in Washington, not ever having worked in Washington, you take the data that you receive from your best advisors and also from your opponents, and you predicate your commitments on those facts, which you think are facts. I think it was a shock to Bill Clinton to find at the end of a campaign that the federal deficit this year is about $50 billion more than President Bush had ever said it was going to be. So he was faced with an enormous increase in the prospective size of the budget. I don't think it's to his detriment that he would correct his campaign promises to deal with the facts as he later knew them to be. One obvious example, perhaps the one to which you are referring, is a middle-income tax credit. I don't think that the middle-income Americans ever should have gotten or been promised a tax reduction with a deficit as high as it was. But when Clinton found that the deficit was much higher than he thought it was, then he reversed himself, I think, in a very courageous fashion. And I think the American people recognize that once you get in office, you've got to modify some of your campaign promises because you really don't have, during a heated campaign, the facts that are accurate as much as the facts are accurate when you finally get in the White House.